I'm really delighted to have Ashleigh Di Lello on with us today, all about bio-emotional healing. Thank you so much, Ashleigh, for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation. Like I said, I love what you speak on and do, and we eat a lot of meat in my house, so we we are fans of that, and I'm excited to be here.
Well, I was inspired by your story, and you're sharing your story, which is often painful to retell our painful stories, and then how you've healed and helping so many. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about where you're from, and how you got to this journey of bio emotional healing.
Yeah, it's been a long journey, so we will surmise it all here. And two parts of it, two life-altering health experiences, which I'm certainly glad when I went through the first one, I didn't know there was a round two coming down the line. I thought, oh, I did this. I did this thing, defied the odds, and hopefully, never again. And life had a different plan, as I think all of us, have experienced in one way or another. So I grew up in Utah, and then throughout my life was able to live in many different places in the country and 45 countries around the world in my professional career traveling through. So it's been a journey. And then we came back to Utah. We love the mountains and our family is here. But my journey started at 13 years old, really young. I was the epitome of health, as I think most 13-year-olds are, but extra so. I danced 5 hours a day. My nickname was the Energizer Bunny because I seemed to never, and that's dating us, I guess. Some people don't know what that means anymore,
That's right.
right? But I loved life, loved dance, couldn't get enough of just living life and doing my passion. And then literally overnight, I was fighting for my life. With no warning sign other than the day before. I remember I was getting my braces on and my elbows started to just throb. And I thought, well, maybe I'm holding them in a weird position when I'm in this chair. And as far as any symptom, that was the only warning sign of something happening in my body. And then I woke up the next day in pain in every joint and muscle, could hardly move. And that was the first day of 4 years of
Wow.
fighting for my life. So it was out of nowhere, which now we really understand how altering that is to the nervous system when there's no preparation. And overnight, you are literally looking at your life and saying, what happened? How is this now my life, my reality? And the worst part about it was I was going to every doctor, every specialist, going all over the country. And granted, this was almost 38 years ago. Okay. So
Yesterday. Yesterday.
or 28 years ago. I mean, 28. I
Yeah, yeah.
just realized my math
Still
got a little
yesterday.
there. Still yesterday. So just to set the context of how much the world has changed with medicine, functional medicine, alternative, holistic, the merging of them, like, you do as well. That didn't really exist then. And there was no social media, Google, YouTube, podcasts, nothing. Right. So we went all over. And I used to pray, really, actually, that one of the tests, the scans, the
Mhm.
blood work would come out positive because at least then we could have a plan. And the worst place to be was that place of uncertainty. I can feel myself dying and I don't know why it's happening and what to do about it. And after about 2.5 years of this journey and getting so sick to some days barely being able to lift my finger, my skin was yellow, my hair was falling out. And the best really I could be told was I had some rare viral infection. We couldn't
Hmm.
diagnose, didn't know how to treat. Clearly, like my liver was shutting down, everything, and essentially just sent home to die.
Wow.
You know, in fact, they were like, you might make medical history books because we can't figure this out, which is not a badge of honor anybody wants.
Right.
Right. But this was when I really started to understand the intricate mind body connection because there were nights I was so sick, so close to dying, I would be afraid to go to sleep. And I
Mm.
would stay awake, willing my body to keep fighting because I really was afraid that if I went to sleep, surrendered that conscious will, my body was so tired, so sick that I was terrified I wouldn't wake up. And those were some of the
Wow.
darkest long nights of my 15, 16-year-old soul. But it really, really allowed me to see how much our brain and our body communicate and how intricately connected they are. So, long story short, it was a long journey. It's my family then started to turn to what then was seen as very voodoo of nutrition and supplementation and even homeopathic medicine and all the pieces of how do I support my immune system in every single way possible to help it do its job to heal.
Mhm.
And so it was a very long journey of really very, very slowly regaining my strength, my capacity. After 4.5 years, I finally really wasn't deathly ill. And then it took a full 6 years for me to be strong enough to go back to dance.
Wow.
So
Wow.
it was a journey.
So was they didn't find a diagnosis, but it was chronic pain, fatigue. I mean, it sounds like sort of a chronic pain fatigue syndrome, the fibromyalgias, all these sort of catch all diagnosis that it comes
Right.
up with autoimmune, immunologic. How did it affect you emotionally? Because I mean, you're a teenager or just an adolescent. That must have been really a challenging thing.
Absolutely. First of all, you can't really relate to anyone your age anymore, right? At 13 years old, I had to grow up really fast. I couldn't
Yeah.
face what was in front of me. And not only did I love life and that was removed from me, but I had this passion for dance that I had done 5 hours a day since I was 7, felt like I was born to do. It was part of my soul, and that was taken from me. So, in that, it was extra emotionally challenging, right? Because this thing that I love to do was taken away, and my capacity to live these years that are supposed to be carefree and fun. But the flip side of loving something so much is that it really helped drive me to
Yeah.
not give up. I
Yeah.
wanted to get back to life, but I was determined. I'm going to dance again. So as much as it hurt me, it also helped save me because I loved it so much that I was determined. And in fact, I used to, as we now know and understand in the brain, but I didn't know then, I used to spend time in the MRI machines during blood work and scans, and I would dance in my mind.
Mhm. Mhm.
Again, there was no neuroscience being taught to me then, right?
Right.
There was no
Right.
podcast, but it was just this instinct of how do I connect to this thing that I love? And this is my only way. So I would be there in the, MRI machine, dancing in class, going through movement and technique, seeing myself on stage. And what's so amazing is I would feel it so much within me. Some days I would cry from loss, and some days I would cry from absolute gratitude at really feeling I'm going to do this again. And what's so incredible now with understanding the brain and how neural pathways are created, I did this for 6 years, right? Imagining myself dancing and being out of dance that long during your teenage years. I mean, how are you supposed to be a professional, right? Those are the most important years in any
Absolutely.
athletics, right? Or dance. And I come back to dancing at almost 20 years old. It took a lot of courage to walk back
Wow.
in that
Wow.
studio, right? I'm now a woman and not a girl, and I haven't been active. And obviously, I had to just lay all my ego aside and step into courage. And I worked really hard. But having said that, it was really mind boggling how quickly my skill level came back and surpassed my peers that had been dancing and competing all over the world for 6 years. And at the time, I had no idea. And I truthfully would just say, God is blessing me because it makes no logical sense. And he did bless me. But when I later studied the brain, I understood he also blessed me that I was driven to harness this capacity in my brain. And for 6 years, that dancing that I did, seeing it, feeling it, that was creating these neural connections as if I had been dancing. So 6 years of that, now it was just a matter of physically executing it, but it was familiar to my brain and nervous system. And just such an incredible, again, manifestation of how powerful our brain is. Even when we can't do something, the power of the brain to create it inside first. So
When did you figure out that it was the brain that was driving the body? And so you basically were dancing for years,
yeah.
and in some way the body knew it, and I'm imagining the joy of the dance was so powerful that it drove the rest of your life. But it's still is tell us a little bit about how you then began to move beyond the dance, or
Yeah.
maybe a little brief about because you have a long career in dancing and traveling the world and doing many things in dance. did when did you get into the bioemotional healing and really dive into that? And are you unique and different, and most of us don't have that?
You mean bioemotional healing or the capacity in the
The
brain?
capacity in the brain.
Well, that's why I created bioemotional healing based on the neuroscience, because that is what so many of us think, right? Even especially even as I sit here and you listen to my story, we are very good at saying, well, that's them. That's because they had that talent and that passion, and I am me. And that's why I love the brain so much, because the functionalities of it are the same for each of us. We just really haven't been taught how to harness it. And
Yeah.
then we get some protective blocks around the brain and belief systems around ourselves that really then become huge barriers to our brain being our greatest asset. And instead it becomes our prison, right? So the thing that brought me to studying the brain is I lost my dance career. Right. I was
Yeah.
blessed to have an incredible career. My husband and I were like the finalists on So You Think You Can Dance. We performed on Dance with the Stars. We headlined a Broadway show, 8 shows a week, from being someone who couldn't even lift a finger. I was really like at the height of the mountain, right? I made it. I'm here. And then it was all taken away
Yeah.
again. And I had a second hip surgery. My career had its ramifications. And the first one, 8 months rehab, learned how to walk, went back. And I thought, well, now my left hip's going to be the same experience. And it wasn't. It failed. And my whole body was launched into chronic pain and chronic nerve pain. And now I can't walk. It's so bad I can barely hold a book. I have a 2-year-old daughter, which was a miracle. I was told I wouldn't have children, which, you definitely live in that realm. So she was my miracle that I cherished. And now I can't pick her up. I
Wow.
can't play with her on the floor. I lost my professional career and I lost my capacity to, be active and live life. And it was, again, like a nightmare, because going into that surgery, I was the strongest, healthiest I had ever been in my life. And then again, that altering, how does one surgery do this to a healthy, strong body? And it was deja vu, except for now I'm a mom and I'm a
Yeah.
wife,
Wow.
and I lost my career and we have businesses. And now I'm trying to show up for all these other people, not just myself. Right. And so it was harder in a whole new way and stressful. And the challenging thing, and also why it felt like deja vu, is no one could figure it out. And I threw the kitchen sink. I mean, I was like, okay, we can do this, everything anti-inflammatory and supplements and all the holistics, cold therapy, sauna, right? Anything you can think of. I did regenerative medicine, over 200 types of injections. I was like a
Wow.
pincushion of doing anything and everything. And I wasn't getting better. And I was getting worse. And I was diagnosed with 3 different chronic pain conditions, told this is my life now. And the best, again, that anybody could tell me was, your nervous system flipped a switch into pain. And this is your life now, right?
Mm, mm.
And after 2.5 years of trying to treat the body, and with that, maintaining the belief I could get better and not becoming attached to this, you're a chronic pain patient now, this is you. After 2.5 years of that, I was probably which is crazy. I never thought I could feel more broken. But I remember one night It was 2 in the morning. I barely slept some nights, 3 hours a night because of the
Wow.
immense nerve pain that even in my desperation, sometimes I would go and search for an Oxycontin left over from a surgery. And when that does nothing for your nerve pain, that's a really scary place to be, right? So
Right.
my family, we were almost about to lose our home because we'd spent everything trying to get me well. And my family's going through this. It seems like there's no answer. This feels like hell. My daily life was unrelenting pain in 12 areas of my body. And I just thought, what do I do? There's nothing left to try. Like, there's literally nothing left to try. And in that moment, when I really was like so close to just feeling exhausted to my core, I had my younger self who had already survived what was impossible, and I thought, well, if I can't find the answer, I'm going to create it. And if my nervous system flipped a switch into pain, there's got to be a way to flip it back. And that's when I just decided to dive into neuroscience 4 or 5 hours a day, trying to understand how the nervous system gets altered. And I realized it can get altered into pain, but it can also get altered into mental and emotional challenges, right? It's a stress response that manifests in a way that's individual to us and our life experiences. And so, piece by piece, merging the neuroscience with my lived experience, I was putting a process together in the hopes of reclaiming my life. And in doing so, I then also knew with every ounce of my being, this was what I'm supposed to do. And I'm going to get my life back. And then I'm going to help others heal their nervous system too. And there's bioemotional healing.
And so maybe you can dive into a little bit of bioemotional healing and neuroplasticity,
Yes.
and what are the things that this is all about? Now let's start there, and
Yeah.
then how is it any and all of us can begin to learn this from
Absolutely.
scratch?
Yeah. So let's start with neuroplasticity because that's a beautiful mechanism in the brain, right? That it allows the brain to change in response to experiences, right? So it's a beautiful mechanism that allows us to get better at the things we practice, right? That talent, mastery, skill, that's our brain's neuroplasticity. The other flip side of that is that it also allows us to get stuck in a chronic stress response, right? Because those neural connections, like the longer I'm in pain, right, the more those pain pathways get stronger and larger. They're activated easier. The longer my nervous system gets to practice sending and receiving pain signals, the longer it does that, the easier it is to create those in the future. Anxiety is no different, right? The longer that we feel anxiety, those neural connections create anxiety. The nervous system is learning how to create that, right? So with time, it's not just that, hey, with time it's going to get worse because it just does. It's also because of this capacity in the brain to get better at the things we practice. Now, this happens when the system starts to break down, right? So when we go through a prolonged physical challenge, right, like pain or illness, or we go through a prolonged trauma or mental and emotional
Hmm.
stress,
Hmm. Hmm.
our nervous system starts to break down, right? Because we're being constantly activated into that fight or flight response. And so when that happens, and this is where we talk also about what happens to the brain with emotions, our prefrontal cortex stops being that kind of proper watchdog and calmly and objectively evaluating our life, right? Evaluating our thoughts, our emotions, our interactions with other people, our sensations in the body, and even our environment. And when that emotional brain starts to take over, anytime it perceives any type of physical or emotional threat, right? It activates those stress hormones, sends them to the body. Now we with time, as that keeps getting practiced and activated, living in stress, living in fight or flight, living in survival becomes our default, right?
Is pain sort of protective in a sense? It's sort of we retract, we regress, and somehow we keep it going that way?
Yeah, absolutely. Even just from a pure neuroscience perspective, pain is the number one protective mechanism, right, in the nervous system. And there's rare disorder where people don't feel physical pain and they live much shorter lives, right? Because they're not getting feedback from their body. So because pain is protective, although it feels like punishment, when the brain is again cross-referencing everything from your life, and that's what's really important. Pain has to be seen through a biopsychosocial lens. It's not just what's happening in the body, it's what's happened in the past, it's what's happening in the present, it's how much your brain thinks it needs to protect you. Right? So
Hmm.
pain is one of the main ways in which it sends those stress signals, like there's something I need to protect you from, and that could be present day or past, because that protection, right, is coming from our limbic system, our emotional brain, which doesn't have a time clock. So it's constantly cross-referencing past in real time, right, in relationship to what's happening in the present. And how that relates to me is I realized when I was sick for over 4 years, my nervous system became hardwired into survival, and for good reason, right? And then I survived and I wanted to go back to life, but my nervous system at a deep subconscious level was like, we got to keep operating this way, right? We survived. This is our home, survival, survival. And what I didn't understand is through my career, I had so many injuries. It didn't matter how well I took care of myself. And I took care of myself the most. I was constantly getting hurt. And I realized it was being driven by this fight or flight response that my body was constantly operating in. In fact, even at the height of my career, I had a hard time breathing deeply, as if my body wouldn't let me relax, right? Because relax means safety. And my body was trained to not feel safe, right? So when my failed surgery happened, it wasn't just the failed surgery, which happened and it was messed up and my body reacted, but the violent way in which it reacted was its cross reference to what was happening now, to what had happened in the past. And my survival mechanisms went into overdrive, which meant pain. But the other side of that was I really had a lot of unresolved trauma, PTSD, emotions that I hadn't really allowed myself to process when I was sick because I was a fighter, and I was so wired to survive that I really didn't allow myself. And some days I didn't have the energy to. It was like I have energy to fight or I have energy to cry. And so I held on to a lot of those emotions that I didn't really allow myself to process. And so now I realized in order to heal my pain, it wasn't just rewiring pain pathways. I had to heal the ramifications of how my nervous system had been altered all the way back from when I was 13. And I had to do them all cohesively. And that's why the brain can send protection both from a physical pain standpoint, but just as much and easily from a mental, emotional pain standpoint. And that's where people have an experience and all of a sudden their anxiety now turns into panic attacks, right?
So that anxiety sort of says, "Don't go there, regress, stop." And
Mhm.
so we often sort of close up, and our bodies react in a way. So what are some of the methods that bio-emotional healing can do for us in order to help us that may be different than other healing methods,
Mhm.
and specific to this particular way of sharing and healing?
Yeah. The first is that I think if you just surmised, it's taking into account healing the person,
Yeah.
right? Not just healing the symptoms. It's healing the person and understanding how every aspect in their life has not only shaped them, it's shaped their brain and how their brain thinks it needs to protect them, right? So it requires looking at the person, and really the first part is really identifying what those experiences in their life have been that have altered them. right? Altered their belief systems, altered how they saw the world, how they saw themselves, right? And those could be emotions of trauma, but also betrayal, of growing up and not feeling love or worth, right? Of having something significant happen into their body, like me, and now no longer feeling safe in the body that you have to live in, right? All these different pieces that then compound to keep their nervous system in stress, which keep the brain sending these protective signals. So the first part is being able to identify those. And I'll give a method you can do by yourself on how to do that. Once we can identify that, we can start to partner with the brain to, notwithstanding its history, help the brain see that we don't need to be protected. We're not there anymore. That was then. Let's work through and process maybe some of the unresolved trauma and belief systems that are now holding us there. And then once the brain feels safe to let that go, and that's key, because it doesn't matter what we consciously bring in if we're not doing it with the brain, to where the brain says, okay, I think we're safe now. We not in the way we were in the past. There's obviously challenges today, but I don't need to protect you in the same way. And then we can use our creative, incredible powers of the brain to rewire a new program, right? A new way of living and thinking and feeling and operating. And that is accessible to all of us. I've had 84-year-old clients whose neural connections were pretty hard wired, and yet she was able to change some patterns that had been there such a long time and get free from them. And before I give you, some techniques you can use, that's just what I want to emphasize. We've been told a story, and you know it well, both in the physical health, but also in the mental and emotional health,
Yeah.
that we're now broken, that we're damaged, our bodies failed us, or now our mind is forever altered because X, Y, and Z happened to us. And that's it. And now you can manage. And you and I both know, right, that we were made far more powerful than that. And no matter how broken or stuck we feel, our brain and our body were designed to heal. We just need to remove some blocks and give it some assistance and tools so it can do its job.
Well,
And I just want to emphasize that.
there's so much about our lives that is about what we can't do,
Mhm.
and a little bit about that God can do everything and we're not God.
Yes.
And so you can't do it. I mean, it's the story that's pervasively ingrained to all of us. It's the program
Mhm.
that's our biggest challenge to rid, because even with the pain, I imagine, if you got a broken hip, that doesn't mean you can't do something, and maybe in the pain also, but how to redirect it. And so what are some of the methods? I mean, I know I used to work on just mindfulness. That was a thing, and I worked on it, and it's significantly improved my life in so many ways, because we live with fear.
Absolutely. And fear is the protective mechanism, right? That's already built in. So we don't just jump off the cliff, right? So fear is there. And then through life, we let that fear grow and amplify. And that depends on what's happened to you, but also how your parents raised you, and even now, studies, right, of being so protective of our kids, of like, oh, don't do that. Oh, don't do that. Or don't do that, right? You start to build this fear in, I can't trust my body. I can't, step outside in this discomfort because I've got to stay safe and comfortable. So fear is there. And fear will always be there to a certain degree for each of us. It's just we need to understand it doesn't have to be a stop signal, right? It's something we can actually look at, be curious about, and say, okay, does this fear help me? Is it serving my life? And that's really this shift of understanding we have the capacity to change our fears and what we believe is possible. Like I always tell my clients, history has shown over and over again, and in the medical world and in the athletic world and in everything, that impossible isn't a fact, it's an opinion. And we can see once somebody changes that, now it's suddenly possible because one person does it.
Dr. Rob Kiltz, another beautiful, spectacular day. And I just want to send thanks to all of those for watching the newest episode of Carnivore Conversations. Be sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple